So welcome everyone to our third workshop during Science Week, and today we're looking at from land to hand. So although when we think about bees we immediately think honey, and this week we've learned about pollination and wax, there are many other things that the bees do gather and make. So without further ado, I'm going to share my desktop and we'll get straight into our presentation. So from land to hand, let's have a look at all the different things that bees gather, and then what they do with them, and then what we gather from the hive, and then what we do with them. So let's have a quick look inside the hive to start with. So inside the hive, you've got a bottom board. You've got, here I go again. You've got a bottom board. You've got a brood chamber where the babies are. Sometimes you have a queen excluder. Then you'll have another box with more frames where the honey super is, and then an inner cover, and then the lid or the outer cover. And inside the hive, you've got workers, queen, usually only one queen, and then drones, which only make up about 5 to 10% of the population. So the queen herself, she will lay an egg, which turns into a larvae, which is then nursed and looked after by the bees. And the workers, after about 21 days, will emerge as an adult bee, and they go straight into their jobs. So within the hive, the babies need things, and obviously the workers need things as well, as far as food and structure to their home goes. So let's look at one of the things that they use in the hive. You may or may not have heard of this before, and this is called propolis. And propolis comes from the trees as a sap or resin from the tree, and the bees use it in their hive either as a bee glue or as a medicine. And so they use the propolis. It's very sticky, and they will put the propolis in where there are any wind gaps to help control airflow. But they also use it as a medicine. So it's highly antibacterial and antifungal. So it also helps with hygiene around the hive. And there are common stories so just remembering that these honeybees, they're actually European honeybees. So over in Europe, their winters are very cold and they get snow. So the bees literally do hibernate during the winter months and don't come out. And that's why they have to rely on the food sources, the honey that they've gathered over the winter periods. But also being nice and warm in the hive, quite often mice will make their way into the hive during winter time. And of course, the mouse is too big for the bees to drag out. So the bees will cover the mouse with propolis. And there were actually photos I could find, but it looked a bit gruesome. So I decided not to include one here. But the bees literally will cover a mouse with propolis, and the mouse will become mummified because they don't want the decaying bacteria and germs spreading throughout the hive. Now, down at the bottom of the screen there, you can see the Propolis Mats. So you can harvest the propolis. This is considered A-grade propolis. And then up to the right-hand, in the top right-hand corner, you can see where they put it on the edge of the frames there, and it can be quite sticky, especially in the warmer months, and that's considered B-grade propolis. So to give you an idea, the A-grade propolis, you only get about maybe 100, 200 grams in a year, but the A-grade propolis that sells for about $200 to $300 a kilo in wholesale. So and it gets used in all sorts of things, which I will show you later on after we finish the slide here. You can't hear me. Can you still hear me? Maybe your sound is turned up. Can everyone else hear me? Okay, the rest of you can hear me. So hopefully maybe it's just the sound on your iPhone you need to turn up. Hope that helps. Okay, the next thing that the bees gather. So this is what the bees are gathering, is the resin from the trees, and they turn it into propolis. The next thing is pollen. So we spoke about this the other day. The pollen is the protein, and the pollen is provided by the plants because they need that for their own pollinization process. But the pollen is a protein, which and it's a super protein, so that actually builds more bee bodies. So the bees will take the pollen and they will pack it into the cells, into the honeycomb, and then they will mix it with nectar, and the nectar ferments the pollen, breaking down the protein into amino acids. And as beekeepers, we call that bee bread, and that's what they feed to their baby larvae. And down the bottom there, you'll see the bee with the pollen on her legs. So the bees are born with these very special baskets on their legs, and it's a bit like cargo pants. So if you can imagine yourself wearing cargo pants and you've got those pockets on the sides of your legs, that's exactly what the bees' legs are like, but they're little baskets, and they push the pollen into there. And as they walk, as they go back into the hive, they can brush that pollen off. But if, as a beekeeper, if we want to harvest it, we have figured out that we can put a smaller entrance onto the hive door. And as the bees are passing into the hive, then the pollen grains will get brushed off their legs. So the entrance is a little bit narrower than what they can fit through, and those baskets will open up and release the pollen. And so then the beekeepers can collect the pollen when there's a big flow on, they can collect the pollen. But the bees are really smart, and they will, after a day or so, they will figure out if they bring back smaller loads, then the pollen won't fall off their legs. So when beekeepers are harvesting pollen, they can only leave the pollen trap on for 2 or 3 days. Otherwise, the production rate drops quite significantly, because the bees then decide they want to keep the pollen for themselves. And in the top left-hand corner, you can see there, it's like confetti all over the bees. So the bees are quite hairy, and like static electricity, especially when there's lots of pollen around, it can actually stick to their hairs. They can look really cute. It's like they've been covered with fairy dust. So the next thing that the bees gather out there in the field is nectar, which we spoke of the other day. The nectar is the juice from the flower, which is the attractant, and it's the reward that the insects or bees get for helping to pollinate the flowers. And the bees take their nectar back to the hive, and as they evaporate the water out, they turn that into honey. Or, as I've already pointed out, they use the nectar to ferment the bee bread. But the nectar is their carbohydrate, so that provides them with energy. And they need that energy for various other tasks in the hive. So the adult bee doesn't eat the pollen anymore. The adult bee needs energy to fly around. So for them, the nectar and the honey is actually their food. So this is the way a bee works. They actually have 2 stomachs. This long snaky one here is their normal food stomach. And then this little balloon up here, this is their honey crop, or their honey stomach. So when they drink in the nectar, they will store it into their honey crop. And when they get back to the hive, they pass it on to other bees, which then deposit it into the honeycomb. And on this frame down below, you can see it's actually got nectar in the bottom center part. And on the top right and left there, that is honey that is capped off. So the bees won't cap off the honey until they've evaporated about 85% of the water out of it. Because nectar, with the higher water content, it can actually ferment, But once honey is cured off properly and has been mixed with the enzymes from the bees and evaporated, then honey will never, ever go off. It might crystallize and turn into powder, but it will never go off. And they've actually found honey in the Egyptian tombs, which is a couple of thousand years old. And it looked like sugar. It was a dust, but it was actually still fine. It had never spoiled. So that's one of the magical things about honey. And here we can see some honeycomb, which is what the bees put in. You take the caps off and it gets spun out and filtered. Or we now have the flow hive where you can just extract the honey straight away. And did you know that a 450 gram jar of honey requires 1,500 bees to travel 180,246 kilometers and visit 4.5 million flowers? And that's 156 kilometers per bee just to get your 450 gram jar of honey. So in a lifetime, a bee will create about a quarter of a teaspoon of honey. So it takes a hell of a lot of bees, and they work really hard to give us this beautiful product that they create. And of course, we can use honey in many, many different ways. The next product that the bees make, and this comes out of their body now. So now we're going from what the bees collect to what the bees make out of their own bodies. So this actually requires a lot of energy. So they will have eaten a lot of nectar, and it's a fairly young bee. The wax glands become very active. So the first job is as a cleaner, then they become a nurse bee, and then they become builders. And so their wax glands become active and they produce these wax flakes underneath their abdomen. And in order to make a kilo of wax, the bees collectively, they will consume about 8 kilos of nectar. So they're burning a lot of energy producing those wax flakes. So they like to do the building when there is a big nectar flow on. And when they are building, as you can see down the bottom there, they form these chains. And so as the wax flakes, they work as a team, and the wax flakes will come out, and the next bee will grab the wax flake and pass it to another bee who will chew it and soften it. And they'll pass it to another bee who then puts it into place. And then they build these beautiful hexagonal honeycombs, which their engineering is so precise and so amazing, to the point where they build the comb, they actually put a very slight angle on it so that the babies and the honey won't ever fall out. And of course, with the wax, they make the comb, as I mentioned before, but we take the wax and we purify it. And as humans, we make many, many different things out of the wax. There's so many different products. Wax is amazingly useful. And at the end of this PowerPoint, I will show you some of the different products that get made, not just candles. Candles have obviously been used for thousands of years, but there are many, many other products. Okay, another product that the bees make out of their own bodies. So they've got a special gland for this, and the gland is actually up behind their head area. And this is royal jelly. So every single bee, once the queen lays an egg, every single bee, whether it be a queen or a worker or a drone, the boys, they all get fed a little bit of royal jelly for the first 3 days of their life. So if you can see in the top right-hand corner there, there is a tiny little larvae floating on top of that royal jelly. But after the first 3 days, the workers and the drones, they actually then get fed the bee pollen, the bee bread after that. But the queen, she only ever gets fed royal jelly. So there's something about the royal jelly that helps her to grow bigger and helps her to develop active sex glands so she can actually reproduce and lay eggs. So there's this thought that royal jelly is a superfood, and it is very well prized. However, it actually has a very short shelf life. So if it is used, it's probably they would have to put preservatives in with it to keep it as royal jelly. And the way that they produce it, in the top left-hand corner there, if you look down, there's actually a plastic cup. Let me go back to that shot there. There's actually a plastic cup. So they have a frame with 2 rows on it, and they put about 20 cap cells in along each row. So you'll have a frame with 40 queen cells that are just starting off, and they will graft eggs into these queen cells, and then they will put these eggs into a hive that is queenless. And because the hive is queenless and the workers are panicking, they will go into queen making mode. So they will build the cell longer and they will fill it up with royal jelly. And just before they cap it off, they will then harvest all of these baby queens and they sieve it out. And if you take your little finger and just have a look at the size of your little fingernail and the top of your little finger there, that's about how much royal jelly they get out of each cell. So it's hardly anything at all. And they will scoop out all of the royal jelly. So it's very painstaking work for us to create royal jelly. And also, obviously, all of those little queens lose their lives when producing royal jelly. The last product that we take out of the hive that the bees produce, and again, this comes out of their own bodies, and it's the Apitoxin. So for them, they have a stinger, which they use as a defense mechanism. They are very protective of their hive. And if conditions are right, if there's a smell they don't like, or the weather conditions aren't right, or it's just in their genetics that they're very defensive, they will risk their own life on behalf of the hive. But it has been discovered over years, and I mean, I'm talking the 1800s, that people have used Apitoxin as a medicine. It's an anticoagulant. It will help with autoimmune diseases like arthritis and multiple sclerosis. And acupuncturists traditionally used to use bees as well for medicine. It's used in cosmetics, in, like I said, medicine. There's definite scientific research around this. But there is a way without having to kill the bee, because when they do sting, unfortunately, part of their digestive system comes out with the sting and they will lose their life. However, down on the right-hand side, as you can see, there's a plate there with all of these bees looking quite agitated. So what they do is they send a mild electric shock, not enough to hurt the bees at all, but enough to get them to be a bit annoyed. And the bees will actually sting the glass plate. So the toxin, the Apitoxin, comes out onto the plate and it will dry. And then the dried toxin could be scraped off and it turns into a powder. So that's the way that Apitoxin can be harvested and then used in these products to help us. And I can vouch that for me, I have felt the benefits. Obviously, being a beekeeper, I do get stung from time to time, and I have arthritis in my fingers. And I can vouch that my fingers really do feel better, especially this one here. I used to hairdress and I've got, you can see that lump there on my finger there. And before I really started beekeeping, I could only close my finger here to about there. But now I can touch again and I don't have the pain in my joints, because obviously working with the bees with my hands, it is my hands that will get stung on a semi-regular basis. So I can vouch that it does work, and there's more and more research going into these kind of alternative medicines every day. So I just thought I'd show you some more examples, because I don't know about you, but I'm a real visual learner. So let's go back to the first one I spoke about was propolis. So this is a bit of bark from the gum tree. And this is actually gum or sap from the gum tree that you're looking at there. So that's the raw form. That's what the bees will gather and collect. And when they take it back to the hive, what they will do, and you can see it here, this is the propolis. So obviously there was a gap between this frame and the next frame. And to fill in the gap, they've put the propolis down the side of this frame. So I can scrape that off, and it doesn't look like much. It almost looks like dirt. So these are all scrapings that I've taken off from the frames. And sometimes it comes, I have in Yarraville and Williamstown, it's a much lighter color. So these are both different versions of propolis that you're looking at here. And this particular one is quite sticky. So as I work with it, it will become softer and softer. It's like a glue. And then what can we do with it? Well, I have a friend in Laverton. So what you're looking at here, this is all propolis down the bottom here that he chopped up. And this was a food grade alcohol that was about 70%. And so that has soaked into the propolis. And so because this is a resin, you need the alcohol to be able to dissolve it. So I could do this with, let's say, isopropanol, rubbing alcohol. And I could put the propolis in, and I could use that as a varnish or a paint on the beehive if I wanted to. But this one, because it's food grade, it's actually consumable. And so what I've done with this, if I ever have a sore throat, this here I've made for myself. This is a mixture of coconut oil, manuka honey, some essential oils, and some of the propolis alcohol that I've got. And I use this as like a mouth gargle. And I also then I can swallow it, and I use it for my throat as well. And it is so good for the immune system. I tell you what, it's amazing. But propolis also comes, these are propolis tablets in health food stores, and you can get propolis candy. So propolis gets used in fairly different ways, and it's becoming more and more popular all the time. I believe if anyone shops at Costco, you can get these particular ones at Costco if you're interested. So there you go. There's a little bit about propolis. The next one I spoke about was pollen. So if you have a look at this bit of comb here, see those dark patches? And I've had this for a couple of years now. So that's pollen that's in there. And I've got one here. You can see so that's the pollen that they've packed in there. And this is a cross section of it. Remember I was talking about I wonder if you can see it. I was talking about the beeswax and how they build it. You may or may not be able to see it. Let me see if I can get the camera at the right angle. Can you see, see these lines through here? They're the different cells. Can you see how it's not flat? It's on a very slight angle. And then the other one on the other side is also on a very slight angle. So there's a very slight V from this side to this side. Okay, because that's one side of the honeycomb and that's the other. So that's the very slight angle, and it's always the same angle when they build it. It's amazing. So their engineering skills, you might be able to see it better. No, it's a bit hard to see, isn't it? But anyway, this is the pollen that they've put in there. and then they've mixed it with nectar. And if I can get the angle right, no, you can't see the shiny. Oh yeah, there we go. See how it's shiny up the top there? So that tells me that that's actually bee bread in there and not pollen. So that becomes a super protein. But of course, it can be gathered, and this is a packet of pollen that was harvested. And you can quite often get those at health food stores. The bee bread is easier for us to digest than the straight pollen, but they're both a super protein. You can sprinkle it on your cereals, that sort of thing. Some people have said that it's meant to support with the immune system, especially if you're going through chemo or something like that. It can help to boost the immune system. I have found that our immune system being in our gut, there's also evidence starting to come out that pollen will help with hay fever issues. So if you are suffering from hay fever and you eat the pollen, then you're less likely to react to it. So I've actually created this honey, and it's a creamed honey. So this is a blend of all of my honeys around this area. But I've also added in here, I've extracted the bee bread. It's quite painstaking work, and ground it up. And I've got one that's just the honey with the pollen that I've creamed. And I've got another one that I've also then added therapeutic grade essential oils with. And I'm getting a lot of really good feedback with this honey. So adding that extra pollen to the honey seems to be really helping people. So yeah, there's, like I said, there's more and more research coming out all the time. I think Europe is overseas, where bees have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. They're a lot more aware of the different things that you can use. Now, nectar, honey. So obviously, good old honey. That has had, it would have been a lot runnier when it was nectar, and it comes in lots of colors. And if you come to the next workshop, you will find out about the different honeys. As I said, we've got Manuka honey as well. There's all sorts of different honeys, and once it's been cured off properly, then it won't go off. It actually stays good for forever. So wax. This wax was in the honey super, and this darker wax was where the babies were. And I can take that wax and I can filter it. So I melt it down, and there's always a bit of a debris on the bottom. So that would have been a first melt. And then we can refine it and clean it, and that's the second melt. So there's a nice clean bit of wax. And as you can see, this would have come, the darker one would have come from the brood frame, and the lighter one would have come from the honey frame, where it was just pure wax. So the darker one basically has pollen in it, because they keep the pollen down where the babies are, because that's what they need to feed the babies, right? So they want the bee bread close at hand. So the different things we can make with wax, there's so many different things. As well as candles, we've got soaps, quite nice. This one, yeah, that's a honey and oatmeal soap with beeswax in it. So not only has it got the beeswax, it's got honey. Beeswax wraps, we made one of those the other day. Cutting board, wax. Lip balms. Now, there's a really simple lip balm: coconut oil, beeswax, and either food flavoring or like a peppermint essential oil. You can make your own lip balm, very easy to do. Then I've got a couple of other creams here that have been made for me. This one is like a deep heat. So this has got calendula and other things in it, and has got beeswax to help keep it stable. And then Plantain Balm, that's got it's got plantain in it. So this is plantain and tea tree oil, olive oil, and beeswax. And the plantain is actually really good for healing cuts. So this, and if you look this stuff up on YouTube, you can make these things yourself. So You can always get beeswax from my website. It'll be 100% pure beeswax, so you might want to experiment and make some of these things for yourself. Right, royal jelly. Let's give you some examples of that. So I thought I might show you. Remember how I said it's very painstaking work? Joanne's cat's come to visit her. So see that in my hand? That is a queen cell. There's another one there. So they're quite small. And as you can see, these ones, there's a little door at the bottom. These ones, the queen actually hatched out of. So this was a queen cell that the queen hatched out of. But I just wanted to show you. So they're very, very small. But when they harvest the royal jelly, so now this is a few years old now, so it's gone brown. That was originally white. So that is how much, it's really not much. That's what came out of a queen cell. Okay. It was swarm prevention year, and I had done a split, and there were like 10 queen cells on this one frame. And what happens is, if the queens hatch at different times, the first one will either go around and kill off all the other queens anyway, or if they're at different stages of development, the first one will hatch, and then when the second one hatches, sometimes the hive can swarm off. So what I do as a beekeeper as part of my swarm prevention is I will keep only like the best 3 or 4 cells, and the rest I'll get rid of. So when I was doing that, I took the opportunity to harvest this little bit of, so that's all you get. That's all you get out of one queen cell. It's not very much at all. Like I said, if you took your little finger, that would be about what you would get out of a queen cell. It's hardly anything at all. But obviously, you know, there's some royal jelly capsules, which are considered a superfood. They get used in cosmetics, that sort of thing. So yeah, so that's royal jelly. I personally don't get into it because I don't like the fact that they have to make all of those baby queens and then get rid of them to be able to get the royal jelly out of the hive. And the last one, of course, was Apitoxin, which I already showed you some examples of. I don't have any in real life, but as I said, it's definitely helped me over time. And there are people around that can offer Apitoxins. It's not very popular, but I'm sure if you did some research, you would be able to find more about it and people that are offering that. Or as I said, you can harvest the toxin, which I really like the idea of, is you can harvest the toxin without the bees having to die. So that would be my preferred method. So there you go. That's all the things you can get out of a hive. The bees collect stuff and then they use it in their own hive, and then they produce things out of their own bodies, and then we collect them, and then we produce things from the things that they've made. So the list is almost endless, and I'm sure they're discovering more things all the time. So the hive's amazing. It offers us so much, and I'm eternally grateful every day for how hard the bees work and the benefits that we receive from them. So before we go into our little candle making workshop, which we're going to do today, do I have any questions? Any questions at all? No, you're a quiet bunch today. Right, I hope you found that interesting. So let's move on to our little activity. Once we start the activity, what I'm going to do is I'll show you just on the table. So hopefully you've all got a kit. It was interesting. Excellent. I'm glad you found it interesting. Hi, Kathy. I'm glad you joined us. All right. So hopefully you've all got a kit. And inside your kit, there would have been some instructions. There hopefully were 2 bits of string. They're going to be your wicks today. I did buy some wick, but it wasn't burning properly. And then, obviously, the other thing that us beekeepers make is the foundation. And this is what we use on our frames, because remember, the bees have to eat 8 kilos of nectar to make 1 kilo of wax. So if we can give them a starter strip, then we've saved them a whole lot of nectar and energy. And so therefore they can put it into making babies and making more honey for us. So we use the foundation, which I've cut up. You should have 3 pieces, and hopefully yours have still got nice pointy tips on. There'll be 2 triangles, a smaller one and a bigger one that's got a straight edge. And then there should be a rectangle. So we're going to make 2 candles today. We're going to make a straight candle. We'll do that one first because that'll be easier. And this is the other wick, and you can see it wouldn't burn. So that's why I've used the brown string. And then we're going to make this spiral candle as well. So we'll do that second because it's a little more complicated. So if you get lost or can't see what I'm doing, you've got your instructions by your side. What I'm going to do, I'm going to come down here now. There we go. Can you all see that nice and clearly? All right. So the first thing you're going to do is you want to get it started. So I'm going to take the string and I'm just going to place it along the edge. And if it hangs out, you want it to hang out because that'll be the top of the candle up here. If it hangs out the other end a little bit, that's okay, or just make it as close to as possible. You can always trim that off at the end if you need to. So let's just press that down. Hopefully you're in a nice warm house. If the wax is too cold, it can become a bit brittle. So if you feel you need to soften it in your hands first, that's fine. So once you've got that stabilized, I'm just going to take the tiniest little amount, a couple of millimeters, and slowly work my way across and secure. Now I'm folding that over, so it's only a couple of little millimeters. I'll lift that up so you can see. So it's really only a couple of little millimeters that I've folded over to secure that in place. All right. And I find it's easier to do that just past the edge of the table a little bit. All right, now we're going to continue the same. So I'm pinching and rolling my way down. Pinching and rolling just little bit by little bit. Pinching and rolling. And then after a while, you'll get to a point. See how now I can push? I'll bring it back to the edge of the table again, pinch and roll. And at some point you'll get to there. Now I go. So now see how I can push that? And I'm wanting to keep the edges parallel. So I'm following the lines along each other. And now I can roll that nice and tightly and nice and slowly. All the way to the end. Oh, I'm getting off track a bit, so I'm just going to come back, straighten that up a bit. All the way to the end. Right. Now you want to secure this so it doesn't unravel. And I just like to use my thumb just to secure that down. There we go. And then a good bang. And you've made your candle, okay? If the wick is too long on the top, and you will find with this wick that it might get a bit long as it's burning. But you can just trim that off. And the bottom's not too bad. I'm not going to bother with that. I'm going to leave that as it is. So there we go. 1 candle. Simple as that. And I love the beeswax. You can smell it, or you can smell the honey inside. It's just so clean. Did you know beeswax actually clean the air when they burn, which is pretty cool. So there we go. That's our first candle. Now we're going to go to our spiral candle. And as I said, this one's a little more complicated. So we're going to start with, you've got 2 pieces. We're going to start with the bigger piece that's got the bit of the square edge on the bottom. So put the other one aside for now. All right, I'm going to flip that over. So this longer edge is going to be the bottom of our candle, and this will be the length of the candle. So it'll end up being up like that. All right. So we're going to do the same thing as before. I'm just going to take the wick. So this is the bottom, so I don't want it to hang out here, but it needs to hang out over the shorter side up there. So I'm just going to secure the wick in place. And then again, taking it to the edge of the table, I'm just going to pinch a couple of millimeters and do it slowly and gently. And just secure that wick in place. All right, so my wick's secured in place. And then I'm just going to keep doing that. Now, as we roll now, see where I've got this rectangle? We're going to stop. We're going to stop when we get to there. So let's just, again, pinching slowly, little bit by little bit, working our way up and down the length of the candle and rolling it over. And then pushing when you can push. And then I'm just going to stop when I get to when it starts to slope. Now I'm going to get the second piece. And that second piece I'm going to lay in. So they should match now, okay? And now I can keep rolling. So you just want to get it started. So go slowly and gently. And remember, we want to keep this bottom edge straight. So make sure that we keep the bottom of the candle straight and flat. The top is now going to spiral its way down, but we want to keep the bottom of the candle flat. And the wax will travel a little bit as you do that, but it's okay. And try and keep the tension even all the way along the candle. So I'm rolling down until I get to the end. Now I don't need to secure up here. The only spot I need to secure are those 2 ends. So again, just using my thumbnail, I'm going to gently squash that wax. And I've got another one there. And then we can bang, bang. And then I can trim the wick. And there we have it. Our candles. I'm going to light them for you so you can see what they look like. Come on, stay lit for me. They worked the other day, trust me. Well, maybe I've trimmed it a bit too short. Don't trim your wicks. Oh, there we go. There we go. Now they're going. There we go. So you've now got 2 beeswax candles to enjoy. And again, I sell foundation. So If you wanted to make more candles, you can buy foundation off of me, and you can buy wicks from Spotlight, sell them at various other candle supply places, sell them. But just do your research, because there is a trick to getting the thicker the candle, the thicker the wick that you need. So there is a trick to getting the right kind of wick. Yeah, so there you go. Beeswax candles. Hope you've enjoyed that. Hope you've learned something. Oh, we got another comment. Let's see what yes, if you didn't collect your kit, you can still get one. That's right. Joanne has some spares at Iramu, so feel free to get one. Any last questions before we go today? They make great little gifts, beeswax candles. You can put a little ribbon around them. Good for Mother's Day presents. You know, little Christmas gifts. Little event, you know, event gifts. And they're quite easy to make once you get the knack of it. So, yeah. No other questions?